Good morning, right? Good morning, everyone. Just quick, I'd like to make this as informal as possible. So if you guys have any questions as I go along, don't hesitate to interrupt me, and I'll be happy to answer the questions instead of waiting till the end of the session. Okay? How many here, if I may ask, are actively in the self-funded arena? Okay, so you may find this a little too basic, but I'm going to go through it, and of course if you have any questions, and if you want to pop in and make a comment, I'll be happy to take it. So having said that, we're going to go through the basics of self-funding. Self-funding is a terminology that I think you're going to understand once we walk through this. So what is fully insured? Fully insured plans we all know. So you've got the BUCAs of the world. When I say BUCAs, you've got Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetna, and Humana. The H at the end. BUCAs of the world that typically offer fully insured products. Fully insured product means you pay a flat fee to the insurance company. Employers pay a flat fee. The flat fee includes, let's say, $100 a month for single coverage, $200 a month for family coverage. Have to give you an example. Your $100 comprises of claims, retention, which is cost of doing business, commission, and of course margin. Margin is typically around 10 to 15% depending on the carrier's block of business, and margin is profit or doing business. Employer may have $0 in claims or $100,000 in claims. You're paying that fixed amount no matter what. It includes state taxes on the entire portion of the $100 or $200 in my example. I know there were some laughs here, but you don't see $100 premiums anymore. For simplification purposes, we're going to go through that. So self-funded is a totally different ballgame. When you're fully insured, the insurance company is the fiduciary. So the carrier holds fiduciary liability. The carrier dictates the rules, the carrier pretty much gives you the off-the-shelf products and so on and so forth. You typically do not see claims experience on fully insured products unless it's over a certain size. So depending on your size market. When you go self-funded, you take that same $100 number. So you're going to take that same $100 and the same $100 you now break out into several components. Includes fixed cost, which I'll touch on, and then includes claims. Typically your claims portion is about 70%, your fixed cost is about 30%. Your fixed cost is hard cash dollars that the employer has to pay the carrier no matter what, which may include administrative costs, includes specific insurance, aggregate insurance. The $70 in my example are soft dollars. The $70, the insurance carrier only charges, or the TP only charges if you have claims. So in other words, if the insurance company has $70 in soft dollars, that's the risk of the employer. If the employer only has so much in claims, $20 in claims, they're only going to pay $20. If they have $30 in claims, they pay $30. If they have $100 in claims, they're capped at the $70. At the end of the year, the plan year, you call it plan year versus policy year, at the end of the year, if the employer never ever had claims worth $70, they never paid out. So in that example, if I have $0 in claims, I as an employer, I never pay out the $70. Of course, in the real world, you're never going to have $0 in claims. Okay? So the players in the self-funded arena is broken into several components. You have what's called third-party administrators, TPAs, they process your claims. So typically, employers are not in the business to process claims. They're not the expert, they don't know what's covered, what's not covered, what's eligible, what's not eligible. So they basically contract with either an insurance carrier, could be a BUCA, or a third-party administrator, which is a TPA. Third-party administrators process claims. They know what's eligible, what's not eligible. They verify benefits. They talk about, process claims, adjudicate claims, et cetera, Then you also have what's called reinsurance. So remember, when you're self-funded, the employer has fiduciary liability. The employer is technically the insurance company. However, so the employer is paying claims out of their pockets. However, if the employer continues to have $1 million, $2 million, $4 million, $5 million in claims, the employer is going to go bankrupt. So what the employer does is says, I'm going to buy reinsurance over insurance. I'm the insurance company, but I'm gonna buy reinsurance over my insurance. What is that reinsurance? I'm gonna split it. I'm gonna buy specific reinsurance, which is insurance over any specific individual if they exceed a certain dollar amount, and aggregate insurance, which is insurance under the specific amount for spouses, employees, and children that don't exceed that specific deductible. Does that make sense? Anyone? Did I make it complicated? Come on guys, help me. I am the employer. I want to go self-funded. I decide I'm going to hire a TPA, contract with a TPA, third-party administrator, to process my claims. That's easy. I design the plan, they process the claims. However, I've got employees. Let's say I have 100 employees under my plan, and I know some of them have catastrophic claims. They might have cancer, they might have diabetes, might have a heart attack. I want to protect myself from catastrophic claims. So I go out into the reinsurance market. Of course, I'm going to use a broker advisor, but when I say I, the employer, use a broker advisor, get specific insurance and aggregate insurance. Specific insurance protects me for any individual over a certain amount. I'm going to call it a specific deductible. So let's say my specific deductible is $30,000. Rena Tequila has a $100,000 claim. Employer is only responsible for the first $30,000. The balance $70,000 comes out of the reinsurer's pocket. That's called specific insurance. Now, what if I have every spouse, child, and employee have $29,999.99 in claims? Have they hit the specific deductible? For that, you buy what's called aggregate protection. So any claims below the $30,000 is aggregate protection. So I want to buy specific protection for any person exceeding the $30,000, but I also want to buy aggregate protection for anyone under the $30,000. So now I've covered my bases. I've got a TPA to process my claims, and I have my reinsurance to protect me for catastrophic illnesses. There are several variations that also are in there when you do that. When you're fully insured, when you have a fully insured client, that fully insured doesn't worry about a whole lot of legal stuff, compliance issues, etc. The employer is not worried about it because the insurance carrier keeps them straight up to a certain degree. However, when you're self-funded, the employer is responsible to make sure they're compliant with HIPAA, compliant with ACA, compliant with FMLA, compliant with ADA, ADIA, etc. So they do need to make sure they have legal advice from the broker, consultant, or anyone, or have an internal legal staff to be able to advise them on compliance issues. Typically, the broker advisor does this for them. Okay, so how do self-funded and fully insured health plans compare? When you're fully insured, I can't read it, but I'm just going to go in different orders. So when you're fully insured, basically you get off-the-shelf products from the carrier. Am I right? United Healthcare, Blue Cross, it doesn't matter. Here are the plan designs, this is what you're going to take it or leave it. You can't really customize it to a whole degree. There's some things they can do, but it's pretty much off-the-shelf products. When you're self-funded, you can customize, design your own plan design. When you're fully insured, you basically, the carrier is the fiduciary. When you're self-funded, the employer becomes the fiduciary. When you're fully insured, you typically don't get claims experience. When you're self-funded, you can boil it down to the nitty-gritty actual individual to determine diagnosis, prognosis, claims, history, prescription drugs, et cetera, et cetera. So you can take that data and use it for the following year. Because it's obviously you can predict your losses and your catastrophic issues more when you have all that data on hand. When you're fully insured, you have less control over the plan. When you're self-funded, you definitely have more control over your plan. You're fully insured, you pay state taxes on the entire premium. When you're self-funded, you only pay state taxes on the fixed portion of the cost, which is not the claims component. It's the cost of paying a third-party administrator to process my claims. It's for the TPA's network, it's for using the network, it's for the reinsurance premium. So you only pay state taxes on that $30 component that I talked about in my example. Okay. The feasibility to create plan design is better, of course, on the self-funded. There are other things you can talk about. You've got unbundled products under self-funded, where it's fully insured, you've got a bundled product. You go to United Healthcare, Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Humana, it's a bundled product. Everything inclusive. Your prescription drugs, your medical, everything. When you're self-funded, you take the best of all worlds. I'm going to go to a pharmacy benefit manager, PBM. Anyone heard of PBMs? I'm going to go to my PBM and get the best PBM contract I can on my prescription drug piece. I'm also going to create my own plan design. Now, I need case management on catastrophic claims. I'm going to find the best case management vendor. You can literally unbundle your products. I want to look for the best network. I don't necessarily want ABC network, I want XYZ network. You can design your network however you want. Another advantage is when you're fully insured, you have to comply with state mandates. Texas has one of the highest state mandates in the country. When you're self-funded, you do not have to comply with state mandates. You only have to comply with federal mandates, i.e. ERISA plan mandates. So you do not have to comply with state mandates. That's a biggie because you can customize it. Give you an example, obesity may be a mandate in Florida. Fully insured carrier says, I got it covered, I have no control because the state mandates that treatment for obesity be covered. You got a self-funded plan, you say Florida and Florida, and they say, no, we don't want to cover it. We're going to cover XYZ maybe, or the diagnosis, but we're no longer going to cover treatment. So that's where you have flexibility in terms of state mandates versus federal mandates. The other thing is if you've got a fully insured plan that's spread out over the country, and you don't have networks, what happens? It's pretty disjointed. You got to find an out-of-area plan, you got to find a PPO plan in network, then you got to combine the two. You're self-funded, you have total flexibility to pick and choose your networks by state. So there are a whole lot of variations in terms. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean self-funded is for everybody. Okay, be careful. And you're going to hear terms called level funding, you're going to hear terms called self-funding, partially self-funded, captive. There are a whole slew of other terms, and you have got to be careful. If you haven't stepped into the self-funded arena, go slow. I would start with this level funded product versus going straight from a fully insured to a totally self-funded product. Margins on fully insured plans, you have about 10 to 15% margin. I call it margin, means profit for the insurance companies. When you're self-funded, there really is no margin per se. It's just the fixed cost that you pay the insurance carriers for the specific pre-insurance, etc. Like I talked about, self-funding is claims. So you have more flexibility in terms of designing it. All right, just a quick quiz here. Anyone want to help me out? So administrative costs associated with a self-funded plan are more costly than those within a fully insured arrangement. True or false? Exactly. Typically, you're going to find your self-funded plans are going to have lower cost in terms of fixed cost. And remember, you're only paying your state taxes on the fixed cost component. Okay. All right, this is where it becomes really important when you're self-funded. So remember, when you're self-funded, take that $100 example I talked about and say, okay, Mr. Employer, right now you're paying $100 for single coverage. If you're self-funded, you take that same $100, split it into $30 fixed, $70 claims. 70 is your soft dollars, 30 is your hard cash. 30 includes your TPA fees, your PPO fees, your reinsurance fees. You have 0 claims, you're going to have to pay the $30 no matter what. You have $70, you pay as you go. Okay? Now there are banking, you're going to have to use the bank account, etc. for the employer, so he has, access to the bank account to withdraw those $70, and that's for another day. But that's so now we talk about fully insured. One of the biggest differences. I have a fully insured plan that's on a calendar year basis, January through December 2017. Employer ABC says, I no longer want to be fully insured in as of December 31, 2017. I'm going self-funded January 1, 2018. Marina Tequila has an automobile accident December 10, 2017. The claims don't come in, they're not filed by the providers with the insurance carrier until January 10, 2018. Who's responsible for those claims? the insurance company. Why? Because it's a fully insured plan. Self-funded doesn't work that way. It's very, very, very different. Self-funded is not based on date of service. It's based on date of service and when it is processed. So if this same scenario, I was self-funded and employee had the automobile accident in December, claim comes in January, it's all contingent on the contract you sign with the carrier on whether that claim is going to fall under the reinsurance umbrella or not. You got to make sure you have no gaps in coverage when you're self-funded. That is very, very important, otherwise you're going to end up having an E&O. So be very careful about your contract provisions when you go self-funded. You're going to hear terms called 12-12, 12-15, 15-12, paid. Be careful when you go through those. So here's the key. When you hear the term 12/12, 12/15, 15/12, 24/12, whatever it may be. The first term says, the first number means when was the claim incurred. So it's the incurred date. The second number is when it is being paid. So if you have a 12/12 contract, that means the claim is incurred during the 12-month period with the reinsurer and paid during the 12-month period with the reinsurer. Which means what? It's an immature year. What does immature year mean? When you're fully insured, carriers bill what is called incurred but unreported claims, or an IBNR, into their premiums. Those IBNRs cover any risk after termination. A 12/12 contract is an immature year because technically, let's say I go see a doctor, I'm an employee, I go see a doctor January 10th. It's a plan year, it's a calendar year plan year. I go see the doctor January 10th. Provider files the claim goes to the PPO discounts it, EOB goes to the TPA processes it, EOB gets produced in March, right? Typically 3-month lag. Am I right? From the date the claim's incurred, typically in the insurance industry, if you talk to an actuary, they're going to say there's typically a 3-month lag in medical claims. By the time the claim goes to the provider files it, gets processed, it's about 3 months. So when you have a 12/12 contract, you're looking at really 9 months of claims, not 12 months of claims. When you go from a fully insured carrier to a self-funded carrier, your client's going to love you for the first 3 months. Why? Because they're going to pretty much see no claims coming in. They're only going to be paying for fixed costs. So in the same example, they're paying for $30. In my example, they don't see that $70. Month 4, it's going to catch up. So when your underwriter, when your reinsurer is writing the risk, they're evaluating it based on an immature year. They're not evaluating it based on a mature year. So you need to make sure you talk to your client and say, you have to build in reserves to cover the tail end in the event you don't like self-funding. And by the way, don't recommend it to a client who's only going to do it for 1 year. Self-funding, it is not a plan, is not something your employer wants to do short-term. It is the worst thing you would want to recommend. Make sure you tell your employer, if you want to do this, look at it at least on a 5-year basis. Don't jump into it if you want to get out of it in a year. So self-funding is truly something you want to be careful your employer knows the pros and cons. So that's what your incurred means. So if you want a 12-15 plan year, that means incurred in 12 months, paid in 15. What does the paid in 15 mean? If I go calendar year 2017, next, and I have the same automobile accident, December 20th or December 10th, the reinsurer says, Mr. TPA or Mr. Employer, you have 3 more months to process that claim for it to fall under the old plan year. So in my example, I had mentioned I have a employer has a $30,000 specific deductible, right? What does the spec deductible mean? Come on guys, help me.
Specific.
Means that if I,
Maximum is ready to give an employer and
Right, so I had an automobile accident, employer is only responsible for the first 30 per person, not per family, specific individual deductible per individual. So I had that automobile accident December 10th. It's a $100,000 claim. Employer pays the first 30. When he gets his check registered, it's going to show he's responsible for the first 30. The first 30 goes towards my aggregate. Remember, I bought aggregate protection as an employer. Counts towards my aggregate. But anything over 30,000, I get a check back for 70 grand. I may have to pay the 100,000 up front, but I get the 70 grand back. That 30,000, that in my example on a 12-15 basis, that claim must be paid by March 31, 2018, in order to fall under the old $30,000 claim. If it's processed in April, May, June of 18, who pays for it? Employer pays for it. Not covered. So you got, yes.
Couple of questions.
Yes.
Minimum number of size for the group should be what?
Question is, minimum number size for the group should be what? All right, so this is going to be more a subjective opinion than an objective opinion. If you asked me 5 years ago, I'd say don't go self-funding unless you have at least 125 employees. Today, because of the level funded product, even 50 employee groups are going. Now, if you have a captive, I'd say 50 employees is sufficient to join a captive. So captive is a whole different ballgame. Captive insurance is where you have a number of employers, small employers, join in the pool of reinsurance products. The higher the number of clients in that captive or employers in that captive, the better the risk. Because remember, insurance is spread of risk. So the higher the number. But if you're starting on self-funding and you want to go that route, go level funded first. 50 to 60, you're safe so long as you make sure you have protection. There are contracts out there on a level funded basis which are a 12-27 contract, which means 90% of your claims are going to be covered in the first 3 months on the tail end, but you're still going to have that trickle 1%. So a 12-27 contract means the claim should be incurred in that 12-month period, but the employer has 15 more months after that to have their insurance company cover that claim for the claim incurred in that year. So the 12-27 becomes a mature year contract. 12-27 for your level funded 50-man group is safe. Yes?
Follow-up. Assuming 50 is the minimum. Anything less than that needs to go fully insured. And even if you've got 50, 60, 70, let's take in the census, age, gender, and prior claim history. If I've got an old group who've been hammering their self-funding plan, this may not work, correct?
Excellent question. Question is, do I look at the demographics of the group? Do I look at the industry and then decide, or is 50 just an arbitrary number? No, guys, you got to look at the industry. That's very important. Give you an example: white collar, engineers, lawyers, 50, 60 man group works. Construction company, oil and gas, don't do it. They tend to have notoriously high claims. So you're right. It depends on the demographics of the group. Also depends on the industry and of course the age. If you've got a 60-year-old average age group, stick with the fully insured. Sorry, stick with the fully insured. Good question. Yes.
Back to his question. Two things. You know, when they do it back to pieces, you know, with alcohol, sure. Who doesn't know how to use it? And you can, the job of that, sure. So the blue collar groups, great, because they keep going. And except for the owners, the head officers. But well, that's okay. A lot of your companies, you're not restaurants for those, and some of your reinsurance players are going down to pretty international payroll, going down to 2 lines, 2 lines. And some of them good, like successful.
I would not go self-funding 10 employee lives. I'm sorry. That's just an opinion. I would not do it. But the question about the white collar, blue collar, frankly, if you're looking at dental insurance, I'd say it's on blue collar workers, dental insurance loss ratios are notoriously very, very good. Insurance companies love to write dental insurance on blue collar, white collar it's high, but the reverse is on medical actuarially. Now, remember, self-funding doesn't mean just medical. I didn't touch on that. So dental insurance, guys. Ever have a catastrophic claim on dental? Ever. What's the cap typically on dental? $1,000, $1,200 a year, right? You're never going to have a catastrophic dental claim. Vision. Ever a catastrophic claim on vision? Because all it covers is your eyeglasses frames. If you've got an employer that wants to go self-funding on the dental vision and tie it to the medical under the aggregate, don't ever buy specific insurance on your dental vision. You'll never hit the spec. It's never going to have a spec claim. Put it under the ag. You're going to save the client a lot of money depending on the case size. And you're going to look like heroes if your brokers or advisors. So, yes?
Question, whether you get 12, 15, 12, 18, whatever, what is the employer's responsibility if that claim falls outside that, whatever, 15 months or 18 or whatever? What is the employer's responsibility?
Employer's responsibility is 100% depending on the plan document. So here's the key. I was going to test that on part 2, but you've got to make sure when you get your reinsurance contract from your reinsurer, it mirrors the plan document. Plan document in your fully insured world is your certificate of coverage. So your certificate of coverage is what you get from the insurance companies, right? It gives you the schedule of benefit, tells you what's covered, talks about your prescription drugs, etc., right? Right? Yeah. Under the reinsurance world, on the self-funded world, it's called plan document. So I'll give you an example. Your reinsurer may say, under the reinsurance contract, they don't cover retirees. Take a city, self-funded. You just wrote the city self-funded, you make them look good, you bought the specific ag insurance, but when the plan doc comes in, covers retirees. Now you got a retiree that has a catastrophic claim, reinsurance pulls out the contract, says, wait a minute, Mr. Employer, we don't cover catastrophic claims, you don't cover anything for retirees, look at our reinsurance contract. So make sure when you're negotiating or talking to the reinsurer that your reinsurance contract mirrors the plan document.
Okay, but
Did I
I
answer
had
that?
a case where a claim took over 13 months to process. So under most reinsurance, unless you have a 1227, that's the only thing would cover that after 13 months. So is there an employer responsibility? I mean, they went back to a fully insured group. So
Yes.
new carrier's not going to pick it up. So
Correct. So your plan doc typically says you've got 12 months to file claims. Typically. Some will say 6 months, but you got to be careful there about HIPAA language, etc. So you typically have a 12-month time from the time the claim's incurred, date of service. So your plan doc says that. Where I see it falls through the cracks when you search insurance carriers or go to fully insured are your RAP charges, radiologist, anesthesiologist, pathologist charges. You typically will catch your hospital bills, the patient will. Typically you catch the physician bills. Where it falls through the cracks are the RAP charges, because what happened, the hospital contracted with a provider outside for those RAP charges, radiologist, anesthesiologist, pathologist charges. Patient doesn't realize it, claim comes in. If it comes past that 1 year period, the employer is not responsible either. Now,
is the employee responsible?
yes, and the employees have to go back to the collection agency or talk to the provider and try and negotiate. But if it is filed within that 12-month period, so what you tend to do is, what I do is always when you switch carriers, first and foremost, make sure it's an education process to the employees. It's in black and white, bold. You've got stop signs, warnings, guys. Don't throw your current ID cards, but make sure you have any claims that were incurred prior to termination filed with ABC, TPA, or whoever it is, or carrier, within X months. Otherwise, the claim will not be covered. Okay. Now, if it's past the 1 year period, and if you get it within you got to call the provider, say, I need to look at the electronic record where you actually received it on time and you filed it on time with the TPA. If they have proof, they'll send it. If they don't, they'll write it off. They will write it off. They did not send it on time. But if it's a clean claim and it wasn't processed within the time period, it is the employer's responsibility to cover that.
They put the wrong, doctor's office put the wrong thing on the insured. And the insurance company rejected it.
For that reason, it was filed in the time frame.
Patients gonna have to go back to the doctor and negotiate with the doctor to write it off. Otherwise, patient's gonna be responsible unless the employer wants to be nice enough to cover it. Because if it's a physician charge, you're talking peanuts in the whole scheme of things.
We negotiated discount in this case.
Yeah, so,
Reinsurance.
yeah,
There's, ERISA has guidance on the number of, or the period of time in which you can file a claim. Or ERISA says a reasonable period of time. It does not state any numbers.
correct.
Statutory law, though, if you look at it in courses or cases out there, anything that was under 6 months generally falls in the favor of the claimant.
Yes, and that's why I said be careful with the language when you put it 6 months, because you gotta be careful how you phrase it. Yes,
So you also have your 12-15, 12-18, 12-24 contract kind of protect against that as well.
not, sometimes yes, but not always. So here, look at this, so the fully insured contract, right? It's fully insured, this is a fully insured contract, and I'm gonna say it's incurred, it's 2012, 2013, so it's 2012 incurred during that period, but the claim comes in afterward, it has to be paid by 2014, 1 year. Fully insured care is responsible. They're gonna pay, if it's eligible, of course. Self-funded with terminal liability, I didn't touch on that, but there's something called TLO, terminal liability option. So when we talked about 12-12, employer can say, I also want to buy a TLO. Be careful about your TLOs, because some TLOs only kick in if you go fully insured. They don't kick in if you go self-funding to self-funding. So be very careful. But you can buy a terminal liability option with the employer, it's very cheap. It covers 3 months of extra claims, it is an additional liability. But on a TLO, the employer says, or the reinsurance contract says, incurred during the same year, but you got 3 more months to pay it off. So I'll cover it after 3 months if it comes in after January 1 in my example. That's your self-funding with the TLO. You got self-funded 1250, which is pretty much your TLO contract. It's very similar. 3 months. Incurred in 12 months, paid in 15 months. Then you got your paid, which typically kicks in at renewal. Your paid contract says, that's why I said if you go 12-12, come renewal time, now becomes a mature year. Remember I talked 12-12, 9 months claims, first 3 months there's a lag, you pretty much don't see much. But then when you come up for renewal in year 2, you now just became a mature year. Why? Because any claims incurred during the prior year are going to be processed in the new year. Now you're looking at a full 12 months of claims plus your IBNR. So really it's a 15 month now claim. You got to make sure your IBNR is taken care of. Incurred but not reported claims. So your self-funded your renewal now at 12-12 becomes a paid renewal. You don't have to worry about any claims incurred during the prior year. You have no gaps in coverage now. Because the same claim in my example, December 10th, came in January, processed in March, is taken care of. However, come January 1, 2018, I started with a brand new $30,000 specific deductible. Am I right? The 30 is not forever, it's 1 year. The claim is processed in January or March of 2018. As an employer, am I obligated to pay another 30 or no? No, it's a paid contract.
You buy a paid contract, if you have a 12, and then you buy a paid on the spec and act, that's to cover for that claim that's coming through. But on a new claim, no, you should start all over.
I'm going to start all over again. It was a 12-12 contract. I was an employee. I had 50,000 in claims in 2017. Forget the automobile accident. I had 50,000 in claims in 2017. Employer paid 30,000, reinsurer paid 20,000, employer's liability was 30 grand. Now that same employee, I have that automobile accident in December. I wanted to hit my 30. But that claim doesn't get paid till next year on a paid contract. Employer is responsible for a new $30,000 unless that claim is processed before December 31, 2017. Does that make sense? Just be careful, you gotta be aware of that. So remember this, if you are aware that you're going to terminate a contract with a particular reinsurer, hound the TPA. Tell the TPA, and you think they're close to their experience or their ag, hound the TPA or the spec to get those claims processed, get a special check register done before the end of the termination date. There are check registers that go every week to the employer to tell them what's covered, what's processed to which provider and what the check is. And those check runs, the employer has to fund the bank for those checks to be released. Hound your TPA or your third-party administrator. If it's the BUCAs, you're gonna have a hard time. If it's a TPA, you can get it done. So there are advantages, disadvantages to us, to you going with the BUCAs. We can talk about that in the next section, but that's where you have to be aware of your 30,000 score. Okay. Your incurred but not reported claims, we talked about this. There are gonna be claims you're gonna terminate. There are gonna be claims incurred prior to termination that are going to be processed after termination. You need to figure out your IBNRs as a broker advisor and let your employer know they need to fund that. So when you're figuring out your premium equivalent rates, everyone knows what COBRA is, right? So how do you figure out your COBRA rates? You take your fully insured rates times 1.02, you come up with your COBRA rates. How do you figure out your COBRA rates on a self-funded plan? Done.
Actuarial.
You can do it several ways. You can get an actuary to do it. You can look at 3 years of data and come up with the average. Figure it out yourself as a broker advisor. Multiply it by 1.02. Be careful, do not include, there's something called aggregate. You cannot include your aggregate 25% corridor in your premium equivalent rates.
You used to, but you?
Can't do it. You got to base it off expected claims. So what we're referring to, so you've got a $100 premium under your fully insured plan. In that same example, your reinsurer is going to say 30 is fixed, 70 is claims, but Mr. Employer, we expect your claims to be $70,000 or $70, but we're going to include a 25% corridor to this. Why? In case, I call it fudge factor, they call it margin. What if your enrollment fluctuates during the year? What if you drop in the number of employees? What if you end up with some catastrophic claims? We gotta have that cushion. So we'll kick in after 25% over 70 is exhausted by you. So in essence, it's not $100, it's $125 premium. Out of which, $100, did I do that right? $95 is claims, 30 is your fixed cost. So it's expected claims plus a 25% corridor, which is called your attachment, aggregate, liability, whatever you may want to, it's synonyms. So employee, when you figure out the premium equivalent rates, i.e. the COBRA rates, or the fully insured premium equivalent rates, or what your fully insured rate would be, you can take the fixed cost plus the expected claims to come up with your premium times 1.02 for COBRA. However, your best bet is, if you can do this, is look at the past 3 years of data, come up with the average, or hire an actuary first year to figure it out. Or you can ask your TPA to help you out. They're pretty good at it. Okay? So your IBNR is to make sure you don't want the employer to have no funds. So when they figure out that premium equivalent rate, at that point, they're going to divvy out, sit down with you to strategize what you want employee contributions to be. Because you can't start with employee contributions if you don't know what the base premium is going to be. So that's where you got to make sure you figure out your PEQ rates. Your PEQ rates should cover your IBNR if you're going on a 12-12 basis. Don't just take your expected claims fixed cost and come up with your PEQ rates. You're going to have an immature year. Yes, Don?
What has been your experience for getting an actuarial estimate to, especially in the first year or two of coverage, you get an actuarial evaluation of the premium?
It's not difficult. Here's the challenge with your actuary. They're going to want data for the prior years to come up with numbers. If they don't, they're going to base it off what they have, which is not difficult to do. There's a calculation, I can send it to you, but if you Google, there's also an DOL way for you to calculate PEQ rates, which you can take the math, figure out the formula, put in your liability factors, and it'll tell you how to do it. Other than that, your TPA can help you. You don't want to spend the money. If you want to, go ahead and use an actuary. You don't want to spend the money, go ahead and use the formula that DOL has provided you. It's very simple. So Department of Labor has that, and if you don't have it, I'll be happy to send it to you. Right, if a client is self-funded and terminates, who is responsible for claims after termination, for claims incurred before termination? New carrier, terminated carrier, employer, neither.
Depends on the contract.
I'd say the new carrier.
New carrier. Employer. Neither. Okay, maybe I should have phrased it better. Client is self-funded and terminates. Who is responsible for claims after termination, for claims incurred before termination? Let's say if...
What contract?
No, the client's terminated now. Always the employer. Always the employer when you're self-funded. Always the employer. Employer has fiduciary liability. That is where you have to remember. There is no carrier per se when you're self-funded. The employer is the insurance company. So it's always the employer. Yes.
I think it's just helpful to know when you buy stop-loss insurance, it's really just helping the employer to protect their liability. It's not really insuring anything. The employer always retains it, so you have to really watch. I think that claim, like on midnight, if you're going to go back to fully insured, on midnight, if you have a catastrophic claim occur, someone gets in a big accident and goes, and they have a $500,000 claim the last week of the year, and that thing doesn't get processed for 4 months, and you had a 12-15, you're kind of screwed. So, you have to really be careful when you either change stop-loss carriers or go back to fully insured, that transition period.
What I would suggest, if you've never been in the that's very true. If you've never been in the self-funded arena, you may want to go slow and maybe call the bukas. If you want to go slow. It's not but if you once you get a flavor of it and understand it, then maybe you can go and venture out on your own. There are a whole lot of variations where you can really do a whole lot of creative things for your employer and save them a ton of money. We're sitting here, I know he and I attended a conference, there's a whole lot of ideas. The key is, I don't want to go through all that because I think I'll confuse all of you, but there's some things you can do when you go outside the buka arena. When you're in the buka arena, you're not very, you're limited to what you can do, because in fairness, the bukas treat a self-funded plan very similar to a fully insured plan. So you're not going to have a whole lot of flexibility, but it'll give you a flavor of what they do in terms of self-funding, and maybe it'll give you an idea. When you get your claims history, you get what's called an aggregate report. When you're self-funded, or an employer self-funded, every employer receives it. It's an aggregate report, and the aggregate report shows month by month, the number of employees covered, how much was processed in claims, how much went over the specific deductible, the balance, and what goes towards the aggregate. They also send you a claim report that's a 50% of specific deductible claim report that gives you an idea of how many employees exceeded, in my example, $15,000. That's 50% of 30 specific deductible. Take a look at those reports and then start digging deeper to get into the nitty-gritty of it in terms of diagnosis, prognosis, predictive modeling, etc. Yes, I'm sorry.
Is there anything we can do in 2018 that we couldn't do last year?
Absolutely, yes. No tax, I'm not going to touch the tax laws yet. There are a whole variation of plan designs that you can do in 2018 that you can do today that you were not able to do several years ago. And you can make a whole lot of difference to the employer's pocketbook, but the key is you've got to make changes in the self-funded. It's not so much in the fully insured, it's the self-funded world. Okay. Lasering. I don't know how many of you know this. Has anyone heard the term lasering in the self-funded arena? Okay. So remember, there are pros and cons to self-funding. Not every client is a fit for self-funding. You are the best judge of your client. So when you take a look at this, lasering means, in my example, $30,000 specific deductible. Rena now has kidney failure, needs dialysis. I'm gonna get on the transplant list. Potentially $1 million claim. When I come up, when the employer comes up for renewal, reinsurer is gonna evaluate the risk for the next year. The reinsurer is gonna say, Mr. Employer, got it done. Don's cracking the whip on me, I gotta stop. The employer is gonna say, Mr. Employer, you have a potential high-risk claimant that we're gonna have to pick up the tab for next year. Potentially going to be $800,000 in claims. As a result, we are going to laser this person, i.e. carve out this person with a higher specific deductible. So this person's exposure is not $30,000. This person's exposure is now $500,000 or $600,000. Or, if you don't want to laser that person, by the way, your spec rates were going up 10%, we're going to bump it up 80%. You pick and choose. So now Mr. Employer looks at it and says, okay, my fixed cost is going up from $30 to $200, or from $30 to $33, but I have the potential, if this person ends up having a transplant, I gotta pay $600 out of my pocket before that person is covered under the aggregate. And by the way, the difference between the $600,000 and the $30,000 does not count towards your ag or spec. A lot of employers think, oh wait, it's 630, I'll take it. So 600 minus 30 is 570, it's gonna count towards my aggregate, does not count towards the ag. So there is something called lasering. Here's where your negotiating powers of skills come into play, and here's where you start digging into it, talking to the nurses, talking to the doctors, talking to case management, and trying to determine alternative measures or alternative things you can do. And in fully insured, you can do a whole lot of things for dialysis and transplants. All right, I think this is the last piece, and I'll go in. The percentage of self-funded workers in the arena, if you asked me about 7 years ago, about 12% of employers were self-funded. It's been steadily going up and up and up, and today they're about, I'm going to round the number, it's about 40% of employers are self-funded, believe it or not. Now, don't forget level funded is included in that 40%. So, but you're starting to see it go up. What you're also starting to see trend. When you look at trend on self-funding, you're pretty much going to find it flat when you see it on fully insured. Guys, that same example of that kidney transplant, fully insured, you think the insurance company is not going to sock it to you? They're going to sock it to you too. So when you sit down with your employer and they say, oh, but I got protection. Yeah, but you're going to see an 80% increase on your fully insured product, so it's the same thing. So that's where you've got to sit down and look at the demographics and decide. There are several types of self-funding, of funding under self-funding contracts. You got the level funding contract, and level funding means it looks like it is a self-funded product technically, but I call it a quasi-self-funded product. It looks just like a fully insured product, but it's self-funded. There's no cash flow advantage to the employer. Why? Because the employer is going to pay that $100 and the $200 in my example every month to the insurance carrier, the TPA. The TPA then pays the claims out of that, so they're funding it up front. When you're self-funded, and we just talked about it, I don't pay the claims, I pay the claims as I go. Here you pay the whole premium up front. At the end of the year, there's money left over, the employer gets it back in terms of reimbursement, claims reimbursement. If the employer goes over the amount in the claims, they start with a clean slate next year, however it's based on their renewal numbers. So that's your level funding. This is becoming more and more popular. More and more insurance companies are offering it. Aggregate stop loss we talked about. Aggregate stop loss means any claims that under the $30,000 for any employee, spouse, child goes towards that aggregate. I have aggregate protection. So Mr. Reinsurer, what if every employee, spouse, and child has 50,000 or 30,000 in claims? I start multiplying that, I'm going to go bankrupt as an employer. So I buy what's called aggregate protection. So let's say that aggregate protection is $1 million. So anyone under 30,000, Rena has 20,000 in claims, Ed has 5,000 in claims, Britt has 6,000 in claims, and so on and so forth. You start counting all that. So long as it's under that amount, then that's fine. That's soft $10. I pay as you go. If I exceed that 1 million, the reinsurer kicks in. You never ever want an employer to hit an aggregate, guys. Never ever. I call it sleep insurance because it already has that 25% corridor. Remember we talked about it? The expected claim should come in about 25% less. You have an ag hit, it's a nightmare because then the reinsurer has an audit done. So we talked about aggregate stop loss. Specific is anything that hits over the spec. Questions? Yes.
Just talking market trends here, of what's called the sub 50 group space, how many of those groups do you see moving to level 5, just a percentage of those covered lives?
I'd say it depends on the appetite of the C-suite. So depending on how aggressive or conservative your C-suite is when you talk to them, and how you present it. And remember, you gotta be careful, even on your level funded, there are lasers. Your lasers don't go away. So you gotta be careful. So if you've got potentially some claims you know that are, if you've got a very sick group, I'd say stick with fully insured.
Yeah, so just to
Because it's a pooled, because if it's under 50, it's pooled, community rated. If it's over 50, they pool it on the block of business up to 100 employees. That's the logic.
So let me frame the question slightly differently. Let's say TR doesn't get extended this year. Right, we know that roughly 50-some-odd % of the covered lives in Texas are still on TR plans right now. Let's say that doesn't get extended. What percentage of those would you expect to go level 5?
I'd say a good percentage depending on how the broker advisor communicates to the employer. I'd say a good percentage.
Okay, thanks.
I would, and the reason I would is because they're going from the frying pan into, so those are the kind of clients that would probably look at it versus someone who's already fully insured with Blue Cross of Texas and has that comfort zone and says, oh, I love the network, I love, what I have, I've got the rates, I don't want to move, so.
Right. I guess my broader point is that there's a very real scenario where you have this kind of market flooding concept here happening, TR doesn't get extended, which can create a real interesting dynamic for the community of folks in the room.
True.
Really pushing a lot.
True, very true. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, yes.
One more quick advantage. Sometimes you find TPA that will consolidate the bill. Paying like the bill and something for you. So there are some.
How many people from the Bucas are in this room? Anyone? I'm going to give you my opinion, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I am not a proponent of placing self-funded business with the Bucas. And the reason I'm not is you can do so much outside. There is so much variation, there is so much flexibility. When you go with the Bucas, you're locked into their rules, their dictates. You can't carve out prescription drugs, etc.
I was talking about consolidating other dental.
TPS will consolidate billing. They will absolutely do it. They'll consolidate your medical, dental, vision. Yes, they'll consolidate it.
So,
Yes.
so I'm with Blue Cross and I do ASO business, and the benefit to the advantage of going with the big one is because you get discounts, network, etc. And you do have flexibility. So despite what you're saying, I mean, I have groups that have all kinds of custom benefits, they have all kinds of custom this and that, and we do partner with some external PBMs and various providers and external vendors in regards to extracts and claims and all kinds of crazy stuff. So
I'm not bashing the Bucas. I'm just saying it's not a fit for everybody. But I think from my perspective, if you've got a high deductible health plan and HSA compatible plan, and you want to carve out your PBM piece, you're not going to be able to do it with the Bucas because they cannot integrate. They're not very good at integrating it. I'm speaking from experience, so, okay, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, just a couple notes. First of all,